And just like over there, the devil was in the details. I found them. Pops's original 1978 dam construction permits. And they were a thing of beauty. See, because he worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers, the dam fell under federal jurisdiction. For flood control and watershed management, that's your first crucial knowledge nugget, Chloe. Any dam built with federal guidance and for a federal purpose creates a jurisdictional umbrella. Local HOAs, city councils, they can't just override that. It's a federal case.
That's a game changer.
It was. I felt this metallic taste of adrenaline on my tongue, the same feeling I'd get before a mission. This wasn't just my land anymore. It was a federal matter. But wait, it gets better. While I was photocopying those permits, my fingers black with toner, I stumbled across a file misfiled behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments. It was brittle, the paper threatening to disintegrate. It was the 1923 water rights deed. My great-grandfather had purchased the senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city's municipal water system, older than the county itself. They weren't just stealing my property. They were stealing my water. Water that my family had legally owned for a century.
Meanwhile, what was Maggie doing? She wasn't just sitting idle, was she?
Oh no. Maggie was a master of the narrative. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam structure. She tipped off a local news crew, of course. I watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," she said, her voice trembling on cue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." It was a brilliant, cynical piece of theater. If any of those reporters had bothered to do 5 minutes of research, they'd have found that my dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. Then she took to the Nextdoor app. She posted warnings about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never used my name, but in a community that small, everyone knew. The harassment campaign was textbook. I'd get citations for unsightly structures, my perfectly functional 1962 farmhouse, loud music complaints when I ran my tractor, environmental hazard reports on my septic system, which had passed inspection 6 months prior. The real kicker was when Rick used his council position to order a wellness check on me through Veteran Services. A very nice, very apologetic social worker showed up, clipboard in hand, because I was apparently a troubled veteran with readjustment issues. Maggie watched the whole thing from her golf cart, a satisfied little smirk on her face.
How did you push back against this bureaucratic siege?
I got smart. I called an old Army buddy, Tony Riggs, who now works in the EPA's Enforcement Division. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught me more than that $85,000 lawyer. He said, "Jake, if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam has federal jurisdiction," he didn't need to finish. I started documenting everything. Trail cameras, timestamp photos of the water diversion, daily flow measurements. I turned my property into a forensic evidence lab. And I found a real ally. Amanda Cross, an environmental lawyer who took my case pro bono. She was a shark and she was brilliant. And we weren't alone. I reached out to my downstream neighbors. There was McGill Santos, whose family had farmed there since the 1880s. His crops were withering without the creek water. There was Mrs. Chen, in her 80s, whose magnificent garden, started by her grandfather, was turning to dust. This wasn't an isolated incident. We formed a coalition. We realized Maggie and Rick had done this before. Amanda's investigation uncovered that Maggie's previous HOA in Houston had paid a $2.3 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd left town just ahead of federal prosecutors and set up the same playbook here. They were repeat offenders.
So you're building your case, but the construction is still happening. The pressure must have been immense.
Every day, another foundation was poured. Every day, the water level dropped another inch. The vibration of heavy machinery was a constant hum through my farmhouse floorboards. Then they went nuclear. Rick fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing to have the city seize my property for public safety. The local paper ran a hit piece with the headline, "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress." They offered me $180,000 for land assessed at nearly $900,000. The message was clear. Take this lowball offer or lose everything for nothing. Maggie's masterstroke was a photo op. She got 20 concerned mothers to stand near my property line with their kids, holding "Protect Our Kids" signs, with my farmhouse looking dark and menacing in the background. The Facebook post went viral. Hashtag Protect Our Kids. She told the news crew, "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods, not whatever issues he brought back from war." You know what? She was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought back the ability to recognize propaganda. And I brought back the engineering skills to do something about it.
This is the turning point, isn't it? The shift from a legal defense to an offensive operation?
It was. I was in the farmhouse attic, looking for more old documents, and I found Pops's journals. I sat on the dusty floorboards and read them for hours. Entry after entry about checking the dam, managing the water, helping the neighbors. One from 1980 broke my heart wide open. Open the spillway today, help the Santos farm and 3 others get through the dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about our profit. It was about community service. Maggie hadn't just stolen land, she'd stolen that legacy of cooperation. That's when I knew. The courtroom battle was important, but it was too slow. They were racing to finish those houses. I had to act. I had to use the tool Pops and the Army Corps had given me. The spillway.
For the listeners, this wasn't about destroying their homes. This was about restoration.
Absolutely. This was a controlled engineering operation. The spillway system, designed by the Army Corps in 1978, included hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. It was designed for exactly this, controlled flooding to restore natural water flow patterns. My calculations showed that with the recent rains, the dam was holding 3.1 million gallons. I needed to release 2.8 million to restore Willow Creek to its original path and prove the HOA development was built in a natural floodplain. We had legal cover. Amanda filed an emergency motion arguing that the original dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were following it. We had federal cover. Tony moved up the EPA inspection to coincide with our demonstration. We had community support. Miguel and Mrs. Chen and the others were ready to bear witness. The day before, Maggie's desperation showed. She hired private security, tactical gear wannabes, who were caught on my trail cameras trying to sabotage the spillway controls by jamming concrete into the hydraulic lines.
The moment you open the gates.
It was 7:02 a.m. The sky was painted in oranges and purples, and storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Perfect seasonal cover. On one side of the property line, Maggie's protesters were chanting. On our side stood Miguel, Mrs. Chen, Amanda, Tony, the EPA agents, and a crowd of farmers and environmentalists. News helicopters circled overhead. I stood at the spillway controls, the metal cool under my hands. I thought of Pops. I took a deep breath, and I opened the gates to 25% capacity.
She pauses, letting the moment hang in the air.
The sound wasn't a violent roar. It was a deep, powerful, gushing sound, like the land itself was taking a deep, relieved breath. It was the sound of water coming home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began to flow in its original ancient bed, exactly where nature intended. It wasn't raging, it was purposeful, determined. I looked over at Miguel Santos, this tough, weathered man who'd worked this land his whole life, knelt by the creek bank, cupped the clear, cold water in his hands, and wept. "This is the water," he whispered, his voice cracking, "that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years. And Maggie? She was live streaming, screaming into her phone, "He's flooding our children's homes! Arrest him!" But ETA agent Sarah Kim, who was standing right there, just said calmly, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." The water wasn't touching their houses. It was simply flowing where it had always flowed, exposing their illegal concrete barriers and decorative creek beds for the frauds they were. You could see the entire narrative she'd so carefully constructed just wash away in real time.
The aftermath was swift, I take it.
The eminent domain hearing was a massacre for them. Our evidence was overwhelming. The federal jurisdiction, the water rights, the evidence of fraud, the recorded phone calls of Rick screaming about property values. Judge Walsh, who was in Rick's pocket, had no choice but to deny the restraining order and rule my actions were legal and beneficial. Rick Thornwell eventually pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and served 3 years in prison. Maggie was hit with $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy. Their construction company was banned from federal contracts, the HOA dissolved. But the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was the restoration. The development site is now a nature preserve, a protected wildlife corridor. The creek is healthy. The Guadalupe bass population recovered. We used the settlement money to start a conservation trust, so no one can ever steal this water again. I bought back Miguel's family farm from the bank and gave him the deed. My spillway operation is now a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers manual.
So in the end, it was never about revenge.
Never. It was about community. The kind Pops built, one neighbor, one act of generosity at a time. From my porch now, I can sit with my girlfriend, Amanda. Fighting environmental crime together creates a pretty strong bond. And I can watch the kids from the new Better Community Association swimming in the creek, in the very spot where McMansions were supposed to be. The creek is singing again, just like Pop said it would. Water finds a way, and so does justice.
Jake Morrison, thank you for this incredible story of perseverance, principle, and the power of water. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you for listening.